I never believed in Bigfoot until I found one living in the abandoned subway tunnels beneath Cincinnati, Ohio, and what happened after that discovery turned into the most terrifying week of my life, proving that some creatures are better left undisturbed in the darkness, where they've learned to survive. Let me tell you this story from the beginning, because every detail matters. It was September of 1998, and I was 50 years old, working as a tunnel inspector for the Cincinnati Department of Transportation. My name is Harold Jennings, and for the past 22 years, my job had been to venture into the forgotten underground spaces beneath the city, the abandoned subway tunnels that most people didn't even know existed. Cincinnati has a secret that not many folks outside the city realize. We have over 2 miles of abandoned subway tunnels that were built in the 1920 seconds but never completed. The project ran out of money during the Great Depression, and the tunnels just sat there empty and forgotten, slowly deteriorating beneath the streets. My job was to inspect these tunnels regularly, checking for water infiltration, gas leaks, structural issues, and pest infestations. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and I liked the solitude. I'd been down in those tunnels hundreds of times over the years. I knew every twist and turn, every station platform, every shaft access point. I'd seen rats the size of cats, dealt with toxic mold, navigated through knee-deep water when the Ohio River flooded, and documented countless cracks in the concrete that threatened to bring the streets above crashing down. I thought I'd seen everything those tunnels had to offer. I was wrong. The trouble started on Tuesday, September 15th, 1998. I remember the date because it was the day after my daughter Michelle's 25th birthday. I'd spent Monday evening at her apartment in Clifton celebrating with cake and watching her blow out candles, telling her father that she'd just gotten promoted to assistant manager at the bookstore where she worked. I was proud of her. Proud that she'd built a good life for herself after her mother and I had divorced 8 years earlier. That Tuesday morning, I reported to the DOT office downtown at 6 a.m. Same as always. My supervisor, a heavy-set man named Carl Rodriguez, handed me my assignment sheet and inspection clipboard. "Got a priority job for you today, Harold," Carl said, sipping from a Reds baseball mug filled with coffee. "We've been getting complaints from residents on Ray Street about strange noises coming from underground, rumbling, banging, that sort of thing. Could be structural issues, could be homeless people camping down there again. Either way, the city wants it checked out." "Which section?" I asked, reviewing the paperwork. "Section 7, near the old Brighton station. You know the area?" I nodded. Section 7 was one of the deeper parts of the tunnel system, about 60 feet below street level. The Brighton station had been one of the planned stops on the subway line that never was. It still had the original platform, complete with ceramic tile work and iron, benches that were now covered in rust, and graffiti from urban explorers who occasionally found their way down there. Yeah, I know it. Haven't been down that way in about 3 months. Last time there was some water infiltration from a storm drain, but nothing serious. "Well, check it out thoroughly," Carl said. "The complaints have been coming in for 2 weeks now, mostly at night between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. People are worried." I gathered my equipment, flashlight, backup flashlight, gas detector, respirator mask, hard hat, rope, first aid kit, camera, and my inspection forms. I also grabbed my lunch pail, which contained 2 ham sandwiches. My plan. Neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had made for me a thermos of coffee and a bag of chips. I was expecting to be down there for most of the day. The access point for Section 7 was through a locked gate on Central Parkway, hidden behind a construction barrier that had been there so long it had become part of the urban landscape. Nobody paid attention to it anymore. I unlocked the gate with my master key, slipped inside, and locked it behind me. The descent into the tunnels was always the same. A metal ladder bolted to concrete, leading down into darkness that my flashlight could only partially penetrate. The air changed as I climbed down, becoming cooler and damper, carrying that distinctive underground smell of wet concrete, earth, and decay. By the time I reached the bottom, 30 feet below the street, I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic above, reduced to a distant rumble. I clicked on my flashlight and began walking east toward Section 7. The tunnel was about 15 feet wide and 12 feet high, with curved concrete walls that were stained with mineral deposits and patches of mold. My boots splashed through puddles that never fully dried, and I could hear the squeaking of rats scurrying away from my light. This was my world, my domain. I'd been walking these tunnels twice a week for over 2 decades. I knew every crack, every puddle, every colony of rats. The darkness didn't bother me anymore. The isolation didn't bother me. Down here, I was in control. It took about 20 minutes to reach the Brighton station area. The tunnel opened up into a larger chamber where the station platform stood, a concrete structure rising about 4 feet above the tunnel floor. The original tile work was still visible in places, cream-colored ceramic with green trim, very Art Deco, very 1920 seconds. Someone had spray-painted abandoned old brick hope across one wall in red paint, which I documented in a previous report. I climbed up onto the platform and began my inspection, checking the ceiling for cracks, testing for gas with my detector, documenting water damage with my camera. Everything seemed normal at first. The usual deterioration, the usual problems, nothing that would explain strange noises that frightened residents 60 feet above my head. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Drag marks on the platform floor. They were recent. The dust patterns made that clear. Something large and heavy had been dragged across the platform, leaving parallel grooves in the accumulated grime. The marks led from the edge of the platform toward the far end of the station, disappearing into a maintenance tunnel that branched off from the main passage. I'd been in that maintenance tunnel before, but not recently. It was a narrow passage, maybe 6 feet wide, that led to an old pump room and some electrical conduit access points. Nothing interesting, nothing that would typically draw attention. But those drag marks were fresh. Within the last few days, I'd estimate. I followed the marks with my flashlight, moving cautiously. My gas detector was silent, which was good. No methane buildup, no carbon monoxide, but something had made these marks, and I needed to document it for my report. The maintenance tunnel was darker than the main passage, the walls closing in on both sides. My flashlight beam revealed more drag marks, and now I could see something else. Tracks. Large tracks pressed into the accumulated mud and dust on the floor. I knelt down to examine them more closely. My knees protesting the movement. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and 22 years of climbing up and down ladders had taken its toll on my joints. The tracks were enormous, easily 16 inches long and 7 inches wide. They had 5 distinct toe impressions and what looked like a heel mark, but they weren't shoes or boots. These were bare footprints, but far too large to be human. My first thought was that someone was playing a prank. Maybe some urban explorers making fake tracks to scare people. But the impressions were deep, suggesting significant weight, several 100-pound at least. And the stride length between prints was long, suggesting something tall, something that took large steps. I took several photographs, making sure to include my measuring tape in the frame for scale. Carl was going to want documentation of this, whatever it was. I continued following the tracks deeper into the maintenance tunnel, my unease growing with each step. The air here was staler, heavier, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. My flashlight beam swept back and forth, revealing concrete walls that were slick with moisture and covered in a fuzzy layer of mold. The tracks led me about 100 feet down the maintenance tunnel, before opening into what had once been the pump room. It was a circular chamber, maybe 20 feet in diameter, with rusted pipes running along the ceiling and an old mechanical pump in the center that hadn't worked since the 940 seconds. The room had 3 other tunnel exits, branching off in different directions, one leading to the electrical conduits, one to a ventilation shaft, and one that I'd always assumed was sealed off. But that third tunnel wasn't sealed anymore. The metal grate that had covered it was lying on the floor, bent and twisted like someone had ripped it away with their bare hands. The opening led into darkness that my flashlight couldn't fully penetrate, but I could see that it sloped downward, going even deeper, beneath the city. I stood there for a long moment debating what to do. Protocol said I should document this, report it to Carl, and let the city decide how to proceed. Breaking into sealed sections was serious. It could compromise structural integrity, create safety hazards, allow unauthorized access to restricted areas. But I was also curious. In 22 years, I'd never seen a grate torn away like that. Whatever had done it possessed incredible strength. I checked my watch, 9:47 a.m. I had plenty of time. I radioed up to Carl, or tried to. The radio crackled with static but no response. We were too deep underground here, beyond the range of our communication equipment. I was on my own. Against my better judgment, I entered the unsealed tunnel. The passage sloped downward at about a 15 degrees angle, and the walls were older here, original brickwork from the 1920 seconds instead of the reinforced concrete from later renovation attempts. My boots crunched on loose debris, and I had to duck in places where the ceiling sagged. This section of tunnel hadn't been maintained in decades, maybe longer. I walked for about 10 minutes, descending steadily, when I started to smell something unusual. It wasn't the typical underground smell of mold and dampness. This was organic, musky, like wet animal fur, but stronger, more pungent. It reminded me of the time I'd visited the primate house at the Cincinnati Zoo with Michelle when she was a child. That distinctive smell of large mammals living in close quarters. The smell grew stronger as I continued forward, and now I could hear something. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing that echoed slightly in the confined space. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far, and I needed to know what was down here. I gripped my flashlight tighter and moved forward. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one natural rather than man-made, a limestone cave that the subway construction must have intersected back in the 1920 seconds. Cincinnati sits on top of extensive cave systems, geological formations carved out over millions of years by underground water. Most of them had been filled in or sealed during construction, but apparently this one had been left accessible. The cave was larger than the pump room, maybe 30 feet across, with a ceiling that rose up into darkness beyond my flashlight's reach. Stalactites hung down like teeth, and I could hear water flowing somewhere nearby, probably an underground stream. And there, in the center of the cave, surrounded by what looked like a nest, made of old blankets, newspapers, and cardboard, was something that made my blood run cold. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, even sitting down, with shoulders so broad they seemed almost twice the width of a normal human's. The body was covered in dark brown hair, matted and dirty, hanging in thick clumps. The arms were incredibly long and muscular, and I could see large hands with thick fingers resting on its knees. The creature's head was enormous, with a pronounced brow ridge and a flat, wide face covered in shorter hair. The nose was broad and flat, the jaw heavy and powerful. And the eyes, God, the eyes were looking right at me. For a moment, we just stared at each other. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to reconcile it with everything I knew about the world. This couldn't be real. Bigfoot was a myth, a legend from the Pacific Northwest, not something that lived under a major American city in Ohio. But there it was, as real as the concrete walls around me. The creature made a sound, a low rumble that I felt in my chest as much as heard. It wasn't aggressive, more like a warning. The massive head tilted slightly, studying to me the way I was studying it. I took an involuntary step backward, and my boot kicked a loose stone. The sound echoed in the cave, and the creature tensed, rising slightly, showing more of its full height. It had to be at least 7 and 1 divided by 2 feet tall, maybe close to 8 feet. The body was incredibly muscular beneath all that hair, built for strength and power. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, my voice shaking. I don't know why I spoke. It was pure instinct, the same tone I'd used to calm a frightened dog. "I'm just doing my job, just checking the tunnels." The creature's eyes tracked my movements. They were dark brown, almost black, and disturbingly intelligent. This wasn't an animal looking at me. This was something that understood, something that was thinking, evaluating, deciding what to do about my presence. I slowly raised my hands, showing I wasn't holding a weapon. "I'm going to leave now. I'll go back up. And you can stay here. Nobody needs to know you're down here." I took another step backward, then another. The creature watched, but didn't move. I kept my flashlight pointed slightly to the side rather than directly at it, trying not to be threatening. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I made it back to the tunnel entrance and began backing up the slope, keeping my eyes on the cave, opening until I was far enough away that my flashlight couldn't penetrate the darkness anymore. Then I turned and walked as quickly as I could without running, my breath coming in short gasps. My mind was reeling. I'd just seen Bigfoot under Cincinnati living in a cave connected to the abandoned subway system. It was impossible, absurd, completely outside the realm of possibility, but it was real. I'd seen it with my own eyes. I made it back to the pump room, then through the maintenance tunnel to the Brighton station platform. I climbed down to the main tunnel and started the long walk back to the access ladder, my legs shaking with adrenaline. What was I going to tell Carl? What was I going to put in my report? If I documented what I'd seen, they'd think I was crazy. They'd probably order a psychiatric evaluation, maybe even fire me for filing a false report or wasting city resources. But if I didn't report it and something happened, if someone else went down there, if the creature became aggressive, if it ventured into more populated areas of the tunnel system, I'd be responsible. By the time I climbed back up to street level, it was nearly noon. The September sun was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the cold darkness below. I stood there on the sidewalk for a moment, blinking in the light, feeling disconnected from the normal world around me. Cars drove past on Central Parkway. People walked by, carrying shopping bags from the mall. A bus pulled up at the corner, letting passengers off. Everything was normal, ordinary, mundane. Except I just discovered that Bigfoot was living under their feet. I drove back to the DOT office in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my 1995 Chevy truck too tightly. The radio was playing Matchbox 23 AM was a big hit that year, but I barely heard it. When I walked into the office, Carl looked up from his desk. "How'd it go? Find anything that would explain the noises?" I stood there with my clipboard, my inspection forms blank, except for the basic information I'd filled in before descending. I had photographs of the tracks of the torn grate, but nothing of the creature itself. I'd been too shocked to even think about taking pictures in that cave. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I found something, but I need to show you the photos first, and then we need to talk about what to do next." Carl's expression shifted from casual interest to concern. "That serious? You have no idea." Carl and I sat in his office for over an hour, reviewing the photographs I'd taken. He studied the footprint images with increasing skepticism, his thick eyebrows drawing together as he zoomed in on the details using the office computer, a bulky Dell that was new that year and considered state-of-the-art. "These have to be fake," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Someone's messing with you, Harold. Urban explorers, teenagers, whatever. They made these tracks to freak people out. Those prints were deep, Carl. Whatever. Made them weighed at least 300 pounds, maybe more. And that grate, you see how it's bent? That took serious strength. Could be multiple people. Could be equipment they brought down." He clicked through to the next photo showing the twisted metal grate. "This looks like it was pried off with a crowbar or something similar. I wanted to tell him about the creature, about what I'd seen in that cave. But, looking at Carl's skeptical face, I knew he'd never believe me. Hell, I barely believed it myself, and I'd been standing 10 feet away from the thing. Maybe you're right, I said, taking the Brial, safer route. But there's definitely something down there. Someone's been living in those tunnels. And based on the drag marks and the nest I saw, they've been there for a while. Homeless? Possibly. But whoever it is, they're big and strong, and they've accessed a sealed section that could be structurally unstable. The city needs to know. Carl rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I recognized from 20 years of working with him. It meant he was trying to decide how much effort this problem was going to require. All right, he said finally. I'll report it up the chain. City will probably want to send a team down there. Maybe get CPD involved if we're dealing with squatters. In the meantime, stay out of Section 7. If there's someone living down there, we don't want any confrontations. Agreed, I said, more than happy to avoid going back down to that cave. But as I drove home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That creature, that Bigfoot. Because what else could it have been, was living under Cincinnati, surviving in the abandoned tunnels and cave systems. How long had it been there? How had it gotten there? Were there others? I lived in a small house in North Side, a quirky neighborhood north of downtown, known for its hippie vibe and eccentric residents. It was the kind of place where nobody would look twice at someone acting a little strange, which suited me fine. After the divorce, I'd bought this place specifically because it was small, cheap, and I could walk to the grocery store. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those eyes staring at me in the darkness. That massive form sitting in its makeshift nest. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with a notepad, trying to write down everything I remembered about the encounter. The creature had been living there for some time. That much was clear from the nest and the accumulated debris. It had accessed the tunnels through that sealed passage, which meant it knew the underground geography, knew how to navigate in complete darkness. The drag marks suggested it was bringing things down there. Food materials for its nest, whatever it needed to survive. But what was it eating? The tunnels had rats, certainly, but could something that size survive on rats alone? There were also the underground streams, fish maybe, and it could potentially access the city above through various grates and access points, scavenging from dumpsters at night when no one was watching. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made in a strange way. Cincinnati's abandoned subway system was the perfect habitat for something that wanted to avoid human contact. Miles of unused tunnels, multiple access points to the surface, connection to natural cave systems, proximity to the Ohio River for water. If you were a creature trying to hide from the modern world, you could do a lot worse. But why Cincinnati? Bigfoot sightings were typically in the Pacific Northwest in remote forests far from civilization. What was one doing in Ohio? My phone rang at 2:00 R&M jarring to me out of a half-doze at the kitchen table. It was Carl. Harold, we've got a problem. City wants a full inspection. Team down in Section 7 today. They're treating this as a potential public safety issue. I need you to guide them through. Is greater than. My stomach dropped. Carl, I really think we should wait. Maybe do some more reconnaissance first. Is greater than. Not my call. This came from the mayor's office. Apparently, the complaints about noises have increased. And now there's a story circulating online about monsters. In the subway tunnels. You know how people get about that abandoned subway. Every few years, someone starts a rumor, and it spreads. City wants it debunked immediately. Is greater than. Who's on the team? You, me, 2 structural engineers, and 2 cops. We go down at noon. Is greater than. I spent the morning in a state of anxiety trying to figure out what to do. If we went down there with a team of 6 people making noise, carrying equipment, the creature might react defensively. It might attack. Someone could get hurt or killed. But if I told them what I'd really seen, they'd think I was insane. I'd lose my job, my credibility, everything I'd worked for over the past 2 decades. At 11:45 a.m., I met the team at the Central Parkway access point. The 2 engineers were young guys, probably in their late 22nd, carrying electronic surveying equipment and looking excited about exploring the famous abandoned subway. The 2 cops were older, more experienced. Officer Frank Morrison and Officer Lisa Chen, both from the downtown precinct. They wore utility belts with flashlights, radios, and holstered pistols. Carl looked at me as we geared up. "You okay? You looked like you didn't sleep." "Rough night," I said, adjusting my hard hat. "Just want to get this over with." We descended into the tunnels, our multiple flashlights creating a circus of moving shadows on the walls. The engineers were talking excitedly, taking measurements and photos. The cops were more cautious, hands near their weapons, clearly not comfortable in the confined underground space. "The tracks I found are about 20 minutes this way," I said, leading them east toward the Brighton station in the maintenance tunnel off the old platform. As we walked, I found myself hoping that the creature had left, had somehow sensed the coming intrusion, and retreated deeper into the cave system, where we wouldn't find it. But I knew that was unlikely. From what I'd seen, it had established a home down there. It wouldn't abandon that easily. We reached the Brighton station platform, and I pointed out the drag marks. The engineers immediately began photographing and measuring. Officer Chen knelt down to examine them, her flashlight beam moving slowly across the disturbed dust. "These are recent," she said. "Within the last few days, I'd say, could be homeless." Officer Morrison suggested, "We've chased people out of these tunnels before. They like to set up camps in the deeper sections." We moved into the maintenance tunnel, following the path I'd taken the day before. When we reached the pump room and everyone saw the torn grate, the atmosphere changed. The excited chatter stopped. The engineers exchanged glances. The cops put their hands on their weapons. "That's not normal," Carl said quietly. "Harold, you said you saw this yesterday." "Yeah, I followed the tracks through that opening, but I didn't go far. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth. I came back to report it." Officer Morrison approached the opening, shining his flashlight down the sloping tunnel. "Anyone down there?" he called out. "This is Cincinnati police. If you're down there, you need to come out. You're trespassing in a restricted area." His voice echoed down the passage, but there was no response. "I don't like this," Officer Chen said. "We should call for backup. Get more people down here before we go any further." "Radio won't work this deep," Carl said. "We're beyond signal range." One of the engineers, his name tag said. Brandon stepped forward. "I'll stay here and keep watch. If anything happens, I can run back and call for help from the main tunnel where there's signal." "Good idea," Officer Morrison said. He looked at the rest of us. "Everyone else, we go in together. We stay together. Keep your eyes open and your radios on in case we get closer to a ventilation shaft with surface access." We entered the sloping tunnel in single file. Morrison in front, then Chen, then Carl, then me, then the other engineer, whose name was Kyle. Our flashlights created a tunnel of light through the darkness. But the shadows between the beams seemed darker than ever. The smell hit us about halfway down. That musky organic odor I'd noticed before. Officer Chen wrinkled her nose. "What is that smell? Animals?" "Might be rats," Carl suggested. "We get big colonies down here sometimes," but I knew it wasn't rats. And as we got closer to the cave opening, as the smell grew stronger, and I could hear that deep, rhythmic breathing again, I knew we were about to have an encounter that would change everything. We emerged into the cave chamber, and for a moment everyone just stopped and stared. Our flashlight beams swept across the space, illuminating the stalactites, the underground stream, and then there in the center, the nest. But the creature wasn't there. "What the hell, officer?" Morrison moved forward cautiously, his flashlight focused on the pile of blankets, cardboard, and newspaper. "Someone's definitely been living down here. The nest was more elaborate than I'd realized during my first visit. There were old sleeping bags, plastic tarps, even some torn cushions that looked like they'd been scavenged from discarded furniture. Around the edges were piles of what looked like food, wrappers, fast food bags, empty chip containers, crushed soda cans. "This is extensive," Carl said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Whoever has been staying here has been here for months, maybe longer." Officer Chen was examining the ground near the nest. "These footprints, Harold, are these what you saw yesterday?" I moved closer, shining my light on the tracks. They were everywhere now, crisscrossing the cave floor in multiple directions. "Yeah, those are them. These can't be real, Kyle." The engineer said he'd knelt down next to one of the clearest prints. "I mean, look at the size. This would have to be from something 7, maybe 8 feet tall." "It could be fake," Officer Morrison suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone making tracks to scare people off, keep them away from their camp." That's when we heard it. A sound from one of the dark passages, leading deeper into the cave system. A low, rumbling vocalization that echoed off the limestone walls, making it impossible to tell exactly where it was coming from. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Officer Chen whispered, her hand moving to her service weapon. The sound came again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. It was a warning, clear as day. "You're in my territory, and you need to leave." "Everyone back to the tunnel," Officer Morrison said, his voice tight. "Slowly, don't run." We began backing toward the entrance we'd come through, our flashlight sweeping the cave, trying to locate the source of the sound. That's when I saw movement in one of the side passages, a massive dark shape shifting in the shadows beyond our light's reach. "There's something there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, and then it stepped into the light. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Officer Chen screamed. Kyle stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. Carl grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. Officer Morrison had his gun out, pointed at the creature, his hand shaking. "Jesus Christ," Morrison breathed. "What is that thing?" The creature stood at its full height, easily 7 and 1 divided by 2 feet tall, maybe taller. In the glare of multiple flashlights, I could see it more clearly than I had the day before. The body was massively built, with thick muscles visible beneath the dark brown hair. The arms hung down past its knees, ending in those enormous hands. The face was broad and flat, with a heavy brow ridge casting shadows over eyes that reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. But those eyes, they had the same intelligence I'd seen before. The creature was evaluating us, counting us, deciding what to do about this intrusion. "Don't shoot," I shouted at Morrison. "It hasn't attacked. It's just defending its space." That's a Kyle couldn't finish the sentence. His scientific training warring with what his eyes were seeing. The creature took a step forward, and Morrison's gun tracked the movement. "Stay back," he yelled. "I'm warning you." The creature tilted its head at Morrison's voice, and I saw something in his expression change. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. It raised one massive hand, palm out in what could only be described as a placating gesture. "Don't shoot. I'm not threatening you." "It's intelligent," Carl said, his voice full of wonder and fear. "Look at its face. That's not an animal." "We need to get out of here," but Officer Chen said, her voice high and tight. "Now, before it decides we're a threat." But as we began backing toward the tunnel entrance, keeping our eyes on the creature, something terrible happened. Kyle, still stumbling backward in panic, tripped over a rock formation. He fell hard, his head striking the limestone floor with a sickening crack. He didn't move. Kyle, the other engineer, Brandon, who we'd left at the pump room, wasn't here. Carl rushed forward to check on Kyle, kneeling beside him, his flashlight revealing blood pooling beneath the young man's head. And the creature reacted to the blood. It moved forward with startling speed, covering the distance between us. In 3 massive strides, Officer Morrison fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, echoing off the walls. Like thunder, I saw the bullet strike the creature in the shoulder. Saw it stumble slightly, but it didn't stop. Morrison fired again, and this time the creature roared, a sound so loud and primal that I felt it in my bones. It wasn't pain, it was rage. We had entered its home, and now we'd heard it. "Run!" Officer Chen screamed, and chaos erupted. Carl was trying to drag Kyle's unconscious body toward the tunnel. Officer Morrison was backing up, firing again. The creature swung one massive arm, and Morrison went flying, his body slamming into the cave wall with brutal force. His gun clattered across the stone floor. Officer Chen had her weapon out now, but she wasn't firing. She was frozen, staring at the creature with absolute terror on her face. I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped between the creature and my colleagues, raising my hands just as the creature had done moments before. "Stop!" I shouted. "We're leaving, we're going." The creature's eyes locked on mine, and for a second that felt like an eternity, we stared at each other. I could see blood matting the hair on its shoulder, where Morrison's bullet had struck. I could see its chest heaving with labored breathing. I could see pain and fury and something else. Betrayal, maybe. I had been here yesterday, had been non-threatening, and now I'd returned with armed people who had shot it. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it with everything I had. "We're leaving now." The creature's gaze shifted to Kyle's unconscious form, then to Morrison, groaning against the wall, then back to me. It made a decision. It stepped aside, clearing a path to the tunnel entrance, but it didn't leave. It stood there, watching, making sure we left. "Carl, grab Kyle. Chen, help Morrison. We're getting out of here right now." We moved as quickly as we could. Carl and I dragging Kyle between us. Officer Chen supporting Morrison, who was conscious but dazed. The creature watched us go, blood dripping from its wounded shoulder, its eyes tracking our every movement. As we entered the upward, sloping tunnel, I looked back one last time. The creature was still standing there, silhouetted against the darkness of its cave, a massive figure that shouldn't exist, but did. Then it turned and disappeared into the shadows. The climb back to the pump room was nightmarish. Kyle was completely unconscious, dead weight, between Carl and me. Morrison kept slipping in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. Officer Chen was on her radio trying desperately to get signal, her voice shaking. Brandon met us at the pump room, his face going white when he saw the blood. "What happened? What's down there?" "No. Meantime, Carl, help us get them to the surface." Now, it took us nearly 40 minutes to get both injured men back to the access ladder and up to street level. By the time we emerged onto Central Parkway, emergency vehicles were already there. Someone had heard the gunshots echoing up through the ventilation shafts and called 911. Paramedics rushed forward, taking Kyle and Morrison. Kyle was still unconscious, his head wound serious. Morrison was more alert now, but he had at least 3 broken ribs and possibly a concussion from hitting that wall. The next few hours were a blur of police, interviews, incident reports, and heated discussions about what we'd seen. Officer Chen insisted it was real, that she'd seen it with her own eyes. Carl confirmed it, his scientific skepticism completely shattered. Brandon, who hadn't seen the creature himself, didn't know what to believe. And through it all, I kept thinking about those eyes, watching us leave, about the blood on that massive shoulder, about the betrayal I'd seen in that intelligent gaze. We had invaded its home. We had shot it. And now I had no idea what was going to happen next. The city went into crisis mode within hours. By evening, the story had leaked to the press. Not the full truth, but enough. Something dangerous in abandoned subway. Tunnels became possible. Wild animal living beneath Cincinnati became inevitably Bigfoot sighting in city tunnels by the time the late news aired at 11 p.m. I sat in my living room that night, watching Channel 5 news report on the incident. They showed footage of the ambulances, interviewed witnesses who'd heard the gunshots, and brought on a zoologist from the Cincinnati Zoo who explained very patiently that Bigfoot didn't exist, and whatever we'd encountered was probably a large, homeless man or a bear that had somehow gotten into the tunnel system. A bear in Cincinnati and subway tunnels, 60 feet underground. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, curiosity seekers, even a cryptozoology podcast host from California who'd somehow gotten my number. I ignored them all. Kyle was in the hospital with a severe concussion and skull fracture. Officer Morrison had broken ribs and internal bruising. Both would recover, the doctor said, but it had been close, and it was my fault. I should have told them the truth from the beginning. I should have refused to take them down there. I should have found a way to protect that creature instead of leading armed people directly to its home. Around midnight, someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Carl standing on my porch, looking exhausted and 10 years older than he had that morning. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. We sat at my kitchen table with coffee neither of us touched. Carl had a manila folder with him which he opened to reveal photographs, not the ones I'd taken, but new ones. Aerial surveys of the area around the abandoned subway tunnels. "The city's bringing in a specialized team tomorrow," Carl said. "Wildlife experts, more police, even some National Guard personnel. They're going to seal off all the access points and do a complete sweep of the entire tunnel system. They're going to kill it," I said flatly. "They're calling it a dangerous animal. After what happened to Kyle and Morrison, they're treating it as a public safety emergency. The mayor held a press conference an hour ago. He's promising residents that the tunnels will be made safe. It only attacked because we shot it first. Morrison fired without provocation. That creature gave us a chance to leave peacefully." Carl rubbed his face, that same tired gesture. "I know I was there, I saw it. But try explaining that to a city council that's getting phone calls from terrified residents who think there's a monster living under their streets." He paused. "Harold, what are we going to do?" The question hung in the air. What could we do? We were just two city employees who'd stumbled onto something extraordinary. Something that challenged everything we thought we knew about the world. "There has to be another way," I said. "Some way to protect it, to let it stay in those caves without putting people at risk." "How?" "We can't just leave it down there, even if the city wanted to, which they don't. We can't guarantee someone else won't go down there. Urban explorers break into those tunnels all the time. Next time, someone might not be as lucky as we were." He was right, of course, but the thought of that creature being hunted down, shot, killed, or captured, and put in a cage somewhere, it made me sick. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with maps of the tunnel system spread out in front of me, studying every access point, every branch, every connection to the natural cave systems beneath the city. There had to be something I was missing, some way to help. Around dry I realized something. The cave system, where the probolic system creature lived connected to other caves. I'd seen multiple passages leading deeper into the limestone formations. Some of those passages might lead miles away from the city, emerging in rural areas where the creature could escape, undetected if I could warn it somehow, give it a chance to leave before the sweep began. It was insane. It was dangerous. It could get me fired or arrested, but I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. At 4:30 a.m., I grabbed my flashlight, my equipment, and a backpack filled with first aid supplies, gauze, antibiotic ointment, bandages. The creature was wounded because of us. The least I could do was try to help it before it had to flee. I drove to a different access point, one on the north side that I knew wouldn't be monitored yet. The sweep wasn't supposed to start until 10 a.m. I had time. The descent into the tunnels felt different this time, more urgent, weighted with purpose. I moved quickly through the familiar passages, heading toward Section 7, toward the cave where I'd seen the creature twice before. The sun was just starting to rise above ground when I reached the Brighton station platform. The early morning light filtered down through distant ventilation shafts, creating dim columns of illumination in the darkness. I could hear water dripping, rats squeaking, and in the distance, the rumble of the city waking up above. I made my way through the maintenance tunnel, past the pump room, down the sloping passage to the cave. My heart was pounding, and I had no idea if the creature would even still be there, or if it would remember me, or if it would attack on sight after what had happened yesterday. The cave was dark and quiet when I entered. The nest was still there, but it looked disturbed, like the creature had been pacing, agitated. I could smell blood, the creature's blood from its gunshot wound. "Hello," I called out, softly. "I came back. I came alone. I want to help." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard movement from one of the side passages, and the creature emerged into my flashlight beam. It looked worse than I'd feared. The bullet wound in its shoulder was inflamed, the surrounding hair matted with dried blood. The creature was favoring that side heavily, and I could see it was in considerable pain. But those eyes, they locked onto me with a mixture of weariness and what might have been hope. I slowly removed my backpack and held it up. "I brought medical supplies. I want to help with that wound, and I need to warn you, there are people coming. A lot of people. Armed people. They're going to search these tunnels, and they're going to try to capture or kill you." The creature watched me as I spoke, and I had the distinct impression it understood, at least partially. It had probably learned to read human body language over however many years it had been living beneath the city. I took a step forward, then another, moving slowly and deliberately. "May I look at your shoulder?" The creature hesitated, then moved closer, lowering itself into a sitting position that brought its massive head down to roughly my eye level. Up close, I could see the intelligence in those features, the age and wisdom that seemed to radiate from it. This wasn't just some unknown primate. This was something special, something rare. I examined the bullet wound as carefully as I could. The bullet had passed through the muscle without hitting bone. A lucky break. But the wound was already showing signs of infection, the edges red and swollen. "This is going to hurt," I warned, opening my first aid kit. I cleaned the wound as gently as possible using bottled water and antiseptic wipes. The creature tensed but didn't pull away, making only small sounds of discomfort, that low, rumbling vocalization I'd heard before. When I applied antibiotic ointment and began bandaging the shoulder, wrapping gauze around that massive arm, the creature watched my hands with evident curiosity. "You need to leave," I said as I worked. "These tunnels aren't safe for you anymore. But I've studied the maps, and I think some of these caves connect to passages that lead north away from the city. If you follow the underground streams, you might be able to travel miles without ever coming to the surface." I finished securing the bandage and sat back. The creature raised its good arm and gently touched the dressing, testing it, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, with everything I had. "I'm sorry we invaded your home. I'm sorry you got shot. You deserve better than this." The creature made a sound, that same musical vocalization I'd heard during our first encounter, but softer, sadder. Then it reached out with one massive hand and touched my face, its palm, rough, but surprisingly gentle. The gesture lasted only a moment, but in it I felt acknowledgement, forgiveness, maybe even gratitude. Then it stood, moving carefully because of the injured shoulder, and began gathering items from its nest, a worn blanket, some food, wrappers that still contained scraps. It was packing, preparing to leave its home. I helped it gather what it could carry, and together we walked to the back of the cave where the deepest passages led into darkness. The creature paused at the entrance to one particularly large tunnel, one that sloped downward into the earth, following the sound of running water. It looked back at me one final time, and I raised my hand in farewell, that same gesture it had given me during our first encounter. The creature raised its hand as well, mirroring the gesture, and then it turned and disappeared into the darkness, moving deeper into the earth, away from the city and the humans who had driven it from its home. I stood there for a long time, listening to the fading sounds of its movement, the splash of water as it entered the underground stream. Then I walked back through the tunnels, climbed up to the surface, and emerged into the morning light of a world that had just become a little less mysterious. The city sweep began at 10 a.m., exactly as planned. I joined the team as an observer, my role officially limited since I was considered too close to the incident. They searched every inch of the tunnel system, every branch, every chamber. They found the cave, found the nest, found the footprints and the evidence that something had been living there, but they didn't find the creature. Looks like whatever it was cleared out, the wildlife expert from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources said, examining the abandoned nest. Probably scared off by yesterday's confrontation. These animals, whatever it was, they're not stupid. It knew we'd be back. They sealed most of the access points. After that, installing new gates and locks posting warning signs. The story died down after a week or two, becoming just another strange chapter in the history of Cincinnati's abandoned subway. A mystery that would be debated by conspiracy theorists and cryptozoology enthusiasts for years to come. Kyle recovered fully, though he had no memory of the encounter in the locked cave. The head injury had erased those final minutes. Officer Morrison recovered too, though he requested a desk job after that. He told me once, quietly, that he had nightmares about those eyes staring at him in the darkness. Officer Chen left the police force 6 months later. Last I heard, she'd moved to Colorado and was working as a park ranger. She sent me a postcard once that just said, "Some things are better left wild." Carl retired a year after the incident, and at his retirement party, after a few beers, he pulled me aside. "You helped it escape, didn't you?" he asked that morning before the sweep. I didn't answer directly. "Does it matter?" "No," he said after a moment. "No, I suppose it doesn't. I'm glad, actually. That creature, whatever it was, it deserved to be free." I stayed with the Department of Transportation for another 5 years, before retiring myself in 2003. I never went back down to that cave, never searched for any sign of where the creature might have gone. Some mysteries, I learned, are better left unsolved. But sometimes late at night, I think about those underground streams and cave systems that run for miles beneath Ohio, connecting in ways we've never fully mapped. I think about how easy it would be for something large and intelligent to travel through them, undetected, to find new places, to live far from human interference. And I think about those eyes watching me with understanding, about that gentle touch on my face, about the wave goodbye from a creature that supposedly didn't exist. My daughter Michelle is 30 now, working as a wildlife biologist for the National Park Service out in Washington State, ironically in Bigfoot country. We talk on the phone every Sunday and once a few years ago I told her the whole story over the course of several hours. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Dad, I think there are more of them out there. Somewhere?" "I don't know," I told her, honestly, "but I hope so. I hope that creature found others like it, somewhere deep in the earth where humans don't go. I hope it lived a long life, safe and free." "Me too," she said softly. "I'm 67 now, and that encounter in the tunnels beneath Cincinnati happened 27 years ago. I don't talk about it much. Most people wouldn't believe me anyway. And that's fine. I don't need anyone to believe me. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And I know that on one September morning in 1998, I helped save something extraordinary, something that existed in the spaces between our understanding of the world, something that deserved protection and respect rather than fear and violence. The abandoned subway tunnels are still there beneath Cincinnati, still sealed, still forgotten by most of the city above. And sometimes I wonder if another creature, like the one I met, has found its way down there, has made a home in those dark spaces, has learned to survive in the underground world beneath our feet. I hope not. Honestly, I hope they've learned to stay away from cities, from humans, from the danger we represent. But if one is down there, hidden in the darkness, living quietly in the spaces we've forgotten, well, I hope it stays safe. I hope it stays hidden, because Some things I've learned are meant to remain mysteries. Some creatures deserve to exist beyond our knowledge, beyond our control, beyond our need to catalog and explain everything we encounter. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I can express, that I was given the chance to help one of them escape, to give it back, the freedom and mystery that should never have been threatened in the first place. That's my story. That's what happened in September of 1998 beneath the streets of Cincinnati, in the abandoned tunnels where a creature that shouldn't exist made its home for a while before moving on to somewhere safer, somewhere wild, somewhere we'll never find it. And that's exactly how it should